Next. This is the rich cropland that is going to be acquired by the MSEZ Limited. And this is the Nalini River, which is a tributary for this, or it's called Ekkar Hole. Next. These are some of the photographs that we took. I mean, these are all going to be under the petrochemical complex. This is a school building which is going to be acquired by the MSEZ, where the villagers meet every week to discuss what is going to happen to them, what is going to happen to their human rights, and how their livelihood is going to be lost. Next. That is the, So the company always makes the statement that although there was agriculture, agriculture is no longer being practiced. You can see the cultivation that is being done in the acquired region. Next. These are some of the meetings. You can see the existing MRPL just from the background. Next. Water. Our friends are here. They have made an elaborate analysis of how the Mangalore city is going to experience the shortage of drinking water. I mean, because you can make out the total requirement of the water is 48 MGD by one single company, whereas entire Mangalore city, including some of the industrial establishments of the city at present, consumes only 18 MGD. See, one single company is going to take away 48 MGD of water, which is 3 to 4 times higher than that of the present drinking water consumption. Just imagine the violation of human rights. Next. Next. Maybe you can skip them off. Next. I'll come to the, fisheries, petrochemical. See, quite often the company representatives makes you, you go to Singapore and see how Singapore has developed. I mean, this is the kind of a statement which the company makes. But one of the alumni of our college, who has done his PhD in the National University of Singapore, was awarded the World National Award by the National University of Singapore for the excellent work that he has done, how the petrochemical industry in Singapore has totally spoiled, totally destroyed the Singapore fisheries. I mean, we have an excellent study made by the some of the alumni, how it impacts the public health. The storage of more than 8,000 tons of carcinogenic gases like benzene is going to affect the public health in the city. Next. These are all some of the but because of shortage of time, I will not be able to give a complete picture of the work that the NGOs have been doing in this country. But next, this is the critical thing. So you can see the displacement that has happened up to 1998. Unfortunately, I could not get the data after 1998, what type of displacements has happened. This is from the Central Water Commission. It is not my data. Central Water Commission itself says that from 90 to 98, more than 55,000 people have been displaced. That is 10 years back. After 1998, definitely more than 1 lakh people might have been displaced. The number of suicides in this country, for every 32 minutes, one farmer is committing suicide. But the number of suicides after 2001 has increased, and now for every 30 minutes, one farmer is committing suicide. That itself shows the violation of the human rights. Next. Yes. I will get into the final conclusion. No, just before. See, in the establishment of any industrial unit, you cannot take the market value of the land as a criteria for paying the compensation. You have to take the ecological value of the land, because land not only generates the crops, land not only generates some type of goods and services, but it has ecological functions. Unless you quantify the ecological functions and value that, you cannot make any cost-benefit analysis. The second thing is how the local local bodies like the Mangalore City Corporation or the local panchayats are going to be affected because of the establishment of the special economic zones is very important. And then public hearing. Public hearing itself could be a separate story. I don't want to get into the details of it. And finally, in those regions which are already developed, do you really need the special economic zones? Is a pertinent question that one should look into that. Again, I come back to the first question that I asked. That is, we need social equality, ecological sustainability, and then such a social, the preamble of the Indian Constitution. Can the legal experts in this hall can bring to a document how the globalization process is affecting the preamble of the Indian Constitution and file a public interest litigation in the Indian Supreme Court? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for that doctrinal research. And I excuse myself for extending you 10 minutes more, and I also request you to bear with me for cutting short your lecture yet. At the same time, I request the other three speakers to tune up for 15 minutes now. And though you expressed in the beginning it was not a law topic, it was a matter of great concern and relevance to today's topic. Thanks for that, sir. And may I now call upon Mrs. Balika, lecturer of this college, for presentation on the topic Human Rights and Terrorism. Please.
Respected moderator, co-speakers, resource persons, delegates, my teachers, colleagues, and my friends. Justice cannot be achieved without protecting human rights. Human rights, if not protected, the state cannot survive. These are the words uttered by APJ Abdul Kalam on the day of human rights, 10th December, in our college. Yes, there can be no democracy without rights, no human rights without democracy. The fundamental rights, that is right to life and personal liberty, are recognized as basic human rights both under Indian Constitution as well as under both the covenants ICCPR as well as under ICESR. Now the question, whether these rights are protected, in fact, within the nation and outside the nation. Yes, this is our concern today to speak on terrorism. Because 2 days back, 13th December, the medias were particular in making the statement that 1 year completed after submitting the request to the President for his pardoning power. What happened to that in case of Afzal Guru? Whether justice is done to the individual who has claimed pardoning power, pardon from the President, or justice is done to the people who are the victims of that incident. In this context, my paper I am presenting on constitutional values, personal liberty, terrorism, and the legislative and judiciary, response of legislature and judiciary. Now, when we are speaking with regard to the constitutional values, the preambular reference to we the people of India being sworn for the cause of social justice, and the statement in part 4 of the Constitution that it shall be the duty of the state to apply directive principles of state policy, that hints at the positive action by the state and the society for ensuring human dignity to all. Although individual is the maker of his own destiny, many a times defects of social organization and non-human factors, famines, employment, and illness block his access to positive conditions of life. Hence, the question is, can the state be a silent spectator when terrorists not only dehumanize the victims but also ruin that state? Now, among the human rights, personal liberty attains a prominent place as it ensures physical integrity and attributes of human personhood. Human autonomy and personhood would get choked and vanished if the state fails to protect the society from individual behavior regardless of his natural desires, impulses, necessities. So personal liberty has the component of freedom of locomotion, right to privacy, right to marital and domestic life, and other residual rights. As T.K. Tope viewed, for traditional liberties arose out of protest against oppressive political institutions, while the subsistence rights arise out of protest against oppressive social economic institutions. The concept of human rights is complete only when there is an acknowledgement of subsistence rights along with the traditional liberties. Now, from the perspective of social justice, if we look at states' inaction in these spheres is nowhere different from the state's overt action that deprives the Article 21 rights. So if human rights are to be considered as reflecting the collective efforts of the community designed to recognize and protect the deeply held values of happiness to all, one should look to the content of rights from the angle of the oppressed section of the society. So as Upendra Bakshi puts it forcefully, there is an immeasurable distance between what we call human rights and the right of all to be human. If you have to compare personal liberty with that of terrorism, of course there is no comparison for that. We have to look at what is terrorism. Can any person define terrorism? Of course, there was a repeated attempt to redefine terrorism, but it is utter failure. Every time there was an effort to define terrorism, it was only an inclusive, it's not a definition as such, illustrative one. So if you have to make an attempt, may not be a complete definition which I am giving, but I will make an attempt where we can say that terrorism may be defined as an act of organized violence to create chaos and disorder for achieving the goals which in normal course cannot be realized within the framework of legal and constitutional institutions. So if you look at the act of terrorists, the only mantra that they chant every time, kill one, terrorize thousands. So every attack made by the terrorists, if we look back where we can find that there was a religious ideology which was vehement, which was very clearly, which was very glaring. But today you cannot restrict it to the religious terrorism. You can find that attacks on.
Sorry for the interruption. We are extremely sorry, madam. And one of the speaker has to leave the session, hence we wanted to complete the formality of honoring him for speaking to us. May I now request the organizers to do the favor.
So if we look back, we can find that with the religious ideology, most of the times the attacks were on temples. But if you look today, what's happening, it is not only the attacks not only on temples, but also on masjid, but also all the places like places of administration of justice and of course, you can find that the attack in Bombay in trains, one single incident, but you can find that one single incident, there were 6 incidents which took place. One day, 6 incidents. Or any such incidents which gives us the idea that it is not only to see that it is with the religious ideology these destructions are taking place, but the terrorists intend to shake the economy of the state. They want to say that there should be destabilization of the state, particularly with regard to the economy of the state. So, if you look at the terrorism from the point of view of globalization, you can find that new scientific discoveries and technological innovations, which has got an impact on the functioning of welfare state, particularly information technology, internet, cyber cafe and electronic instruments, which have provided new opportunities to the terrorists. New technological methods have lessened the territorial barriers and shortened the period of transportation and communication. The ruthless methods and inhuman logic of market have nurtured terrorism. A few developed states have acquired enormous wealth at the cost of a few developing states, and they would like to keep control over the economy of financially weaker states. In a way, unabridged globalization and privatization has adversely affected the lives of common people throughout the developing countries. The forced globalization of expectations in terms of material culture, goals and choice between capitalist culture goals and the underprivileged socio-economic locale has been responsible to make a person criminally innovative, aggressive and violent. If you look at the legislative actions and judicial responses, since independence we can find, in order to cover the areas of law and order, public order and security of the state, nearly 38 enactments were passed, of course out of which 12 are existing today. But you can find that no specific law was passed till 1985. Where 1985 TADA was enacted, Terrorist Disruptive Activities Act was enacted by the Parliament. There were thousands of objections on that, but still you can find that judiciary which appreciated the act in the case of Kartar Singh versus State of Punjab, where the words used by the judiciary in order to appreciate the act, where it said the country has been in the firm grip of spiraling terrorist violence, various parts of the country, there were countless violence and is caught between deadly pangs of disruptive activities. Apart from many skirmishes in various parts of the country, there were countless serious and horrendous events engulfing many cities with bloodbath, firing, looting and killing, even without sparing women and children, and reducing those areas into graveyard, which brutal atrocities have rocked and shocked the whole nation. Of course, the flowery words are used here, but we can imagine, because we are in the process of course, not just that it's the end of it by passing TADA. Now, in 1985 with the intention of having it for 2 years. Once again, it was not stopped, or it was not uprooted within 2 years. So there was a requirement of further continuation of the act, and it continued for a period of time, for a 10 years long period of time, 1995. But we can find that even then, the very enactment itself was not a draconian. Of course, it was described as a draconian law. It was described as a draconian law only because the law enforcers misused this act with their political ends. And you can find that the impact of terrorism, because the TADA has been repealed in 1995, that does not end the matter. We can find that once again there is an upsurge in the activities of the terrorists. Because 1995, till the enactment of POTA, we can find that the number of incidents that took place was much, much higher than what was happening during 1985 to 1995. So after 1995, there was a need of specific law. So POTA, of course, there was an ordinance during which you can find that at the time when the ordinance was in continuation, we can find attack on our parliament. But we can find that POTA Act was not existing. Some of the provisions, of course, after passing the POTA, some of the provisions of the POTA was much criticized, how it was criticized in the TADA. Similarly, it was criticized, but we can find that the criticism of those provisions of the enactment was similar to that of the TADA, and it was not due to the act, but it was due to the misuse of that particular provision of law which was criticized. If you look at the judiciary point of view, judiciary has appreciated, has not said that it is a draconian law. If you look at the case of People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India, the constitutionality of violation of the basic human rights, the court found that this particular case is without merits. So, the question is, in the fight of terrorism, whether human rights must be respected. Certainly, yes. Now the question, how far it is possible for us today to protect the human rights of the innocent citizens and the protection of human rights of those culprits. What is the necessity? So we have to look at if you look at from the angle of the global level, where if you take example of one state like America, where immediately after the 11th September incident, where they could pass a particular law without going against the rule of law, according to the rule of law, and it is to protect the right to life and personal liberty of the citizens. Well, the state like India, why can't pass such a law? Now, of course, one may say that there are sufficient laws, which was justified earlier in case of Parliament attack case as well as Red Fort case. It is said that even without having these draconian laws, we can punish the people, punish the culprits. But we can find that in case of Afzal Guru, punishment is not there even till today. Though Supreme Court has decided the matter, saying that there is a requirement of course it has convicted the person, but there is no actual punishment. Or in case of Parliament, the Red Fort case, where in the lower courts, the decision was on the basis of the existing penal laws, where they justified by saying that these penal laws are sufficient to curb this menace. But we can find that after these two attacks, after these two decisions, at least if we can find that there's a reduction in the number of terrorist acts within the state, certainly we can justify or accept what they say is correct. But it is not true. We can find that every month or quarterly, so you can find that one or the other incident of terrorism is going on. Now the question, the state like India, which is multilingual and multi-religious, is there any possibility of passing off a law like American law? Today, what is necessary for us is to draw a clear distinction between the possible and practical, and between avoidable and necessaries. So, social expectations must be reflected in our legal framework. Although threat is global, India must take the initiative to prevent terrorism, as it is a threat to democratic state. I end my speech with the words of Swami Vivekananda, where he says, "Up, up, the long night is passing, the day is approaching, the veil has risen, nothing will be able to resist its tidal fury. Believe, believe, India must rise." Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thanks for that sharper exposition of the topic human rights and terrorism. The next speaker is Madam Nirmala Kumari. She will be presenting on the topic human rights and child exploitation. Madam, as I mentioned already, 15 minutes is for you. And Madam has already promised that Chanda Matad 15 Dimsa Mugustin and 15 Nimishal Mugustara. Over to you, Madam.